Hey folks, Nick here from Another BookTube channel, and today I'll be reviewing X, the novel by Tim Waggoner, based on the movie that was written and directed by Ty West. The X trilogy, or the Maxine trilogy, or the Pearl trilogy, whatever you want to call it, was very popular, a big hit, kind of right off the bat. I think X was very well received as a standalone slasher horror movie. I certainly loved it. But the follow-up, Pearl, really took hold in the public consciousness. That's the movie that had all the memes made out of it. The trilogy recently wrapped up this year with Maxine, which admittedly I actually still haven't seen yet, even though I really like the first two. And I know that the internet consensus is that that's the weakest one. But nevertheless, I personally like X the most. I like Pearl a lot. But X was a very surprising movie because it is the first and only slasher movie that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of them. I've seen all the best, and I've seen a lot of the worst. Um, it's the first one that ever made me feel something. It's a slasher that had a message, it had themes behind it, and it actually was trying to say something and do something interesting with its characters and not just be a vessel for kills. And there were those too, and they were really good. But it's a movie that I am still impressed with. So when A24 announced that they were releasing novelizations of each movie, all written by Tim Waggoner, who I'm not familiar with, wasn't familiar with, I knew that I at least had to get X, just because I like it so much, and I really like the cover that they announced for it. And now that I have finished this, unfortunately, I will be having to get the Pearl novelization as well, because I absolutely loved this book. This is easily the best novelization I've ever read, and I think that this work can stand alone as probably the best 70s trashy horror paperback that was never actually written in the 70s. Like, if this was in Paperbacks from Hell by Grady Hendrix, this would fit perfectly in with everything else, and this would be considered cream of the crop, top of the heap type stuff. So let me get into it a little bit. What is X about? It is, let's see, it's set in 1979 in Texas, in rural Texas, and it's about a group of, I'll say, call them young filmmakers, some auteurs, who rent out a farmhouse with the intention of filming a dirty movie, but a dirty movie that makes you feel something in your heart as well as in your pants. So they rent out the farmhouse to do so, but the people that own the farmland, this old couple, Pearl and Howard, they are very, very old, and they get wind of what's going on on their property, and I'll leave it there. Things go poorly from there. It is a surprisingly touching story. It's a surprisingly good story. Maybe not touching, but it is an emotionally affecting one, and that's why I like the movie so much. Because it's actually trying to say something about aging and that desire as a young person to make sure you leave your mark on the world, to not let your life pass you by. And then on the flip side, you've got the point of view of Pearl and Howard, who are old. Like, their life has passed them by, and they're looking back on it like they didn't get completely what they wanted out of it. They also have this feeling of like they know that they're old, but in their minds they are still young. They're still worth something. They can still do interesting things. They still want to, fool around like teenagers. It's interesting, and it creates a really unique type of slasher story. And I've said it before with novelizations that you've already got the majority of the work kind of done for you, because you've already got the plot, the pacing, what scene follows what scene. You've got the characters, sorted out, and like what they're going to do, what they're going to say, where they go, why they do it. Like, it's all there for you. So when you're writing a novelization, it's really just about getting it down on paper and writing it in a literary way that's clear, that's interesting. Not a small feat. I'm not saying that that's easy to do, just that you don't have to worry about all the other stuff. So it's a bit of a streamlined process, I would imagine, to not have to think about all that stuff. But what particularly impressed me about this book is how clearly Tim Waggoner understands these characters, how much he understood the themes that I mentioned before about what the movie was really about and what it was exploring, and then taking that and adding and embellishing the work to reflect those themes. Now, as far as the plot goes, nothing in here happens that you didn't see in the movie. It's beat for beat, scene for scene. There's no changes from the movie. And yet, this was not a boring book at all, because Tim Waggoner spends a lot of time, a lot more so than usual in a novelization, getting in the heads of each of these characters, not just the main character. Every character in this book has at least one chapter where their inner monologue gets to be shared, and it just three-dimensionalizes them. It makes them more than just the facade that you may have gotten just from the movie. The movie itself does a pretty good job of fleshing the characters out and making sure that there's nobody who's just stock. But this, even more so, there's just a lot of time spent, more so than usual, in a novelization, getting to know them, getting to understand why they do certain things, what might be going through their heads in a certain moment. A lot of the times a novelization will do like a couple things, a throwaway line about like, just trying to relate something to an established character trait. But this, I think, spends a lot more so than usual. And I want to give an example. It's not like the most amazing example. This prose isn't going to blow you away. But this is an example of Waggoner taking the time to actually just get into a character's head and talk about like what they might be thinking. This is a scene that in the movie is completely silent because it's just a character, the character Jackson, who is a Vietnam veteran, walking around the pond on the property looking for Pearl, because Pearl is missing. So this is complete silence in the movie, and this is what we get in the book. Jackson was far more comfortable in the dark than he was during the day. At night, it was just as hard for an enemy to see you as it was for you to see them. Maybe not so much with gators, though. From what he understood, the animals had good night vision. He might be smarter than they were, but this was their environment, and they were far better adapted to it than he was. This was why he kept 2 yards between himself and the water. He wanted to give himself plenty of room in case a gator tried to attack. He wasn't concerned about the ones in the water. They'd make splashing noises if they came at him, giving him time to react. But the ones lying on the shore, concealed in the tall grass, were a much bigger threat. They would be able to attack more silently, and he might not know one was near until he felt its teeth sink into his flesh. One good thing, at least the gators weren't armed with AK-47s like the Viet Cong had been. He was surprised at how easily he'd slipped back into a soldier's mindset, and he was even more surprised at how natural it felt. Other vets had told him that you can leave the war, but the war never leaves you. He hadn't understood what they meant until now. So it's not, groundbreakingly original writing, that mentality of, a soldier not being able to leave the war, but that didn't need to be in here. A lesser novelization would write this scene and just be like, walking around in the night like this reminded him of the war. And then it would just move on to just explain the next thing that happened in the movie. Like, Waggoner takes the time to write out all of that and really make these characters feel real. And that's why this was elevated for me. And I think that this is a really special novelization. It's one that I think it works really well if you've seen the movie, but if you've never seen the movie, I think it works even better, probably, because you can just take it at face value as a novel, and it works completely as one. You do not need to have seen the movie to appreciate this. This feels as though it is a 70s pulp paperback that was on the shelves at that time that you could pick up, and it would be just as trashy as anything that any of those major writers in the 70s would have put out. Because of the subject matter, there's a lot of sex in the book, a lot of graphic sex that doesn't need to be censored as much because this isn't a movie. There's no rating system. The violence is just as violent, if not even more so in its description. So this covers the trashiness, it covers the sex, covers the violence, and it gives you three-dimensional characters that you really get to know. Nobody is stock, and it just elevates the material of the movie very impressively. I cannot recommend this book enough. I really loved it. My arbitrary and subjective grade for X, the novel by Tim Waggoner, is a 10 out of 10. I loved it. I have no notes to give this. I hope that the Pearl one is going to be just as good. Let me know if you picked up this book and your thoughts on it. Let me know how you feel about the X trilogy. Thank you very much for spending some time with me today, but now it's time to get back to reading.